Glad to have everyone today. It looks like we have a good crowd. Engineers Week has been a tradition that starts with the Engineers Club. I'm Paul Snyder, the 2017 president of Engineers Club. We listed Julie, who intended to be here, but she was taking her money and is still doing that and helping others come in. So it's important to us that we get everybody in that can participate, and we'd like to begin this way. I'm going to lead us in a prayer and pledge, if we would. Make sure that we have a flag. Every once in a while we find it if we don't. Then we'll have just a couple of words from two other people. The food is prepared, I'm told, and we'll begin with that in just a few moments. So would you stand with me, please? Heavenly Father, we praise your name today. We recognize you as the Creator, and while we merely innovate with that which you've put in our hands and in our hearts, we've asked that you would use us for your purposes. Thank you for the meal today, for those that have prepared it and are serving it. We ask that you would help us to be grateful daily for the abundance that we enjoy and from all that comes from you. Teach us to show kindness to each other in the way that we learn it from you, and may we always use the skills and tools that you have bestowed on us for good. May that which we say and do today be honoring to you. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May be seated.
There, I would add a little bit of my observation for somebody who has truly amazing feats as a leader, and he's also a race walker. So it's amazing. He just ran 10 miles a couple weeks ago, so I don't know how he does it, but he is wonderful. It's wonderful to call him as a friend and also a research partner, so thank you, Tom, for doing that. 52 years ago, Tom was where many of our engineering students are today, preparing to graduate and wondering what the future held. In making critical decisions about his future, the choices that he has made influence not only his life, but many lives of people that he has touched. I mentioned earlier, Tom's success in corporate sector is matched only by his commitment to service. In addition to his distinguished service to the nation as a member of armed forces and in government services, while working in Brooklyn, he set out to improve the lives of those in that New York borough and achieve national recognition for his leadership in improving public education, reducing crime, creating employment opportunities, and building hundreds of residences for neighbors that are in need. He authored a book about his experiences in neighborhood revitalization entitled The Golden Hand Grenade, a lifetime fighting to rebuild a tiny stretch of urban America. Tom is also the author of another volume of Competitive Walking. The title of that book is Stride to the Top, which could be a great forward description of Tom himself. In committing to his 6,500-mile walk, he did so in support of the effort to rid the world of the killer disease, malaria. His commitment to eradicating malaria is truly tireless. His talents and energy are matched only by his determination to end the spread of that disease. Some of my students and I have the privilege to working with him on research effort with a goal to address this malaria health that impacts thousands of people even today, every year. Tom, we thank you for all you have done for so many through your work in helping to improve the health of people across the globe, in outreach to improve the lives of communities, and in support of mission and goals of your alma mater. You have accomplished much, and we are honored to have you with us. Can one engineer really make a difference? Your life's work answers that question you pose for us today with a resounding yes. You prove that one engineer can really make a difference. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Klein.
Thank you. So this is the title, Can One Chattanooga Engineer Make a Difference? Now, why did I use Chattanooga? because I'm a Chattanoogan engineer. You say, well, wait a minute, you graduated 50 years ago. You haven't been back. You've never done any engineering in Chattanooga. But here's what happened. When I got off that train, I was only 18 years old. And fine, my moral values had already been formed. Yes, I had a sense of religion. And my dad worked 7 days a week at night. And my mom taught me how to study. And I knew nothing about engineering. But when I came here, I understood what engineering was. What I learned at Chattanooga, no place else, is the relationship between engineering, math, and science. But engineering, as you know, is more complicated than that, much more complicated, because engineering is also the relationship with history. If we don't know and study history, we make the same mistakes, and we can't build upon what was done before. Engineering is also about government. At the end of the day, we can't do it in Washington, but at the end of the day, we have to communicate with government. And engineering, finally, is about spirituality, is that we have to have a purpose in our life. And if you want to make a difference, you have to have a spirituality. It doesn't mean you need to believe in a creator. There are people who call themselves agnostic, who still have an outlook on life to serve others. So I want to ask you a question. How many people here think that one Chattanooga engineer, just one, I'm not talking about me, although I'm one, can make a difference? Raise your hand if you really think so. Okay, let's see. There's a few back there that aren't quite sure yet, but okay, thank you. So these are my objectives for today. I'd like to introduce you to some engineers who I think have made a difference. You'll know all of them. But equally important, I'd like to discuss us. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to talk about my own career. Believe me, I am not in the same category of anybody that I'm going to introduce. I believe in changing the world through engineering, one tiny little step at a time. I'm going to introduce you to some people who may have done more than that. Now, does everyone see this statement? This is very, I don't believe it. I don't believe it, because engineers are about communicating and collaborating. We have to collaborate with PhDs in chemistry and physics and other fields. We are collaborators. We are not the independent breed. Now, this is one that my wife loves. Because the pig likes it. This is what we do. We argue science and technology. I make the mistake of also arguing politics, and that usually is a loser, but we are good at arguments because we've learned the science behind our science, and that makes us very effective in the business world. Now, what about these people? There are engineers who make a difference many ways. I'm going to start with technical. That's what engineers know about, making a difference. How about this person? Anybody know who this is? Thomas Edison, yes. You know what I really love about this hero of Menlo Park? It's not only his 1,039 patents. What I love about him is that when he invented the incandescent light bulb, he improved on what was done. In other words, he did his research, he did his history, he did his study to become one of the most prolific inventors in the United States. Then, this is my favorite engineer of all. Does anyone know who this is? Roebling, yes, her first name? Well, Mrs. Roebling is termed today as the first female, the very first female ground engineer. You see, because she helped build the Brooklyn Bridge, there she is, and her husband, when he started the bridge, John Roebling, later Washington Roebling, later followed by John Roebling. Washington Roebling, by the way, does anyone know what kind of engineer he was? You're right, he was an industrial engineer. Oh yes, thank you. So, but what happened? He was working on the bridge and a barge was coming in. A piece of lumber fell off the barge and it broke his foot and he died. He died from the resulting injuries. Now, then his son took over and his son decided to go down in a caisson. The Brooklyn Bridge, which still stands today, one of the most formidable bridges in the world, is built by caissons. Caissons are these huge lumber. And what kind of lumber was it? It's southern pine. Southern pine. Pinus ponuscus. That breed doesn't exist anymore. 99% has been eliminated in the world by overcutting. My view is that some of this southern pine actually came from Tennessee. And it's certainly shipped out of Chattanooga. Certainly shipped out of Chattanooga. However, the caissons disease, this was the first diving bell. And they didn't know about the bends. So caissons disease is called the bends. So John Roebling, the son, actually died of the bends. And for the next 14 years, Emily Roebling really built the Brooklyn Bridge. And this is it today. Look at that Formula Bridge. I put that up there specifically. You see what's behind it. And you see the challenge that we face. On one hand, we have technology. On the other hand, we have the world that we have to deal with. Now, does anybody know Mae Johnson? Mae Johnson went to school, and at 17, she became a chemical engineer. Then she became a physician. Then she became the world's first African-American astronaut. Now, can you imagine being an African-American young girl in her times trying to even get into engineering school, but becoming the world's first astronaut? What a very famous and phenomenal person. And then we have another person in our room. I'm gonna read, if you read on the internet, can you please stand up, Dr. Pack? We have one of the most renowned electrical engineers in our country today. Here's what they say. I wrote it down so you know I didn't make it up because he introduced me well. He is the drone mastermind. This is a quote. He is the person that gets drones to think for themselves. This is his research. He is a specialist in brainwave sensors. But I know something that the internet doesn't know. He is also an excellent leader. You know, I've observed leadership my whole life. I'm still trying to be an effective one. But he has the open door policy. If you go by that dean's office, there's always students sitting down outside the office, and the door is open because they can speak to him. So for this leader and one of our greatest engineers, a round of applause, please. Now, that's technical, but there's something I call serendipity engineering. We are more than just technical. Let me see if I can demonstrate.
Oh, now why would he do that? Most peculiar. What on earth?
They're coming! They're coming!
And guess what profession this engineer studied? This is an engineer. He studied navigation and mechanical engineering at the University of London. Yes, and he's known for his attention to detail. How about this engineer? Does everybody recognize her? Yeah, please, sir. Cindy Crawford, yes, yes. Also at 17 years old. Yes, thank you. Thank you. From where? She went to Northwestern University at age 17. Now, can one Chattanooga engineer make a difference? If you'll allow me, I would like to just explain a little bit of how I've tried to do this. May I say, honestly, that the day I joined the Army, I said I was going to try to make a difference in the world. And you're going to see my experiences in New York City as God is my judge. Every single day when I got on that train, I opened a notebook Dr. Pack saw I still have 2 notebooks there, and I wrote down, make a difference every single day. Because I knew my mission was not only helping people to have good employment, making the quality is number 1, finances, all of this, but it was to make a difference in the world, and part of that was with the employees that I had to deal with. So if you'll allow me, please, although I don't pretend to be in the same category, I learned to try to make a difference a little step at a time, a little. So, you know, for me, there's about 100 steps for 1/10 of a mile. But if you add those all up over a lifetime, if each little step is geared towards one written objective to make a difference, think what you can accomplish. So this is Vietnam. I'm going to start here. It was very sad. I often cry, and Dr. Pack and others have heard this story before, but we were building roads. By the way, as an IE, I had to pass the civil engineering exam, but I roomed with 5 civil engineers, so they coached me on how to do that. So we're building roads. This is basically they were built by the French. And the problem was that there was a lot of mines on these roads. So after we finished the grading, because of all the rain that we had to have great shoulders of the road. But after we'd finished them and we put rock in them, I was speaking about the asphalt. I used to work in a rock crushing plant in Vietnam, actually, that had been overrun the year before I got there. And we would build this road, and then we'd spray it with penafrine, liquid asphalt. And we'd run up the road, and our vehicles would be blowing up, and young men would die. Every day we went out with mine sweeps. However, we couldn't always hear the mines, and the mine sweep team was often attacked, and young men died. So I came up with this idea, well, don't run up the roadway, run the roadway only with the vehicle, and put a pipe out to spray from the main roadway on the shoulder. And I said that to my sergeant, he laughed at me. Through my whole career, people have laughed at me. He said, oh, sir, that will never work. Don't you realize the viscosity of penafrine is such you'll never find a pump to pump it? Well, I didn't know anything about pumps until a little Mexican sergeant came. He said, sir, before I came into the Army, I was a pump repair person, and I think I can get a pump to do it. So I'm going to show you a little clip here of what actually happened.
Security was a big problem in this area, being so close to Cambodia. So before their helicopter landed, I had Vietnamese tanks securely hidden in the woods just in case there would be a problem. And I showed them everything we did. One of my finest accomplishments was to show them a machine that I invented, which allowed us to spray penafrine, liquid asphalt, on the shoulder of the road while running on the roadway. So instead of in the morning having to drive a truck up the shoulder, which was made of dirt and may have had mines, we were able to drive up the center of the road. And this invention was adopted for all engineers throughout Vietnam.
Now, I'd just like to ask for a moment of silence, because life takes its twists and turns. When those gentlemen got off the helicopter, there were 2 generals and 2 colonels and a major and a sergeant major and a lieutenant who replaced me. I told the colonel, sir, I want to be with the men. He said, then Lieutenant Rogers will be my aide. You have a master's degree, I prefer you. I said, sir, please. 2 weeks later, all of those young men in that picture were shot down in a helicopter, including the 2 generals. General Casey, who was the highest ranking officer to die in Vietnam, a 3-star general. 2 weeks later, he had been there to see me. But talk about serendipity. The plane was shot down on July 7th, 1969. They recovered the bodies the next day, July 8th, my birthday. But let's talk about humanity now. We know you can make technical changes. There's serendipity. You can go into other fields. But what about humanity? Well, in my world, I built this wall on technical capability, technical knowledge, surrounding myself with smart people. But what I really wanted to do was change the world. And so I got lucky. I got selected as a White House fellow. It's a long story. I'm a good interviewer. And so I was living in Puerto Rico. Pfizer proposed me for this program, and I got to go to St. Louis, Missouri. And in the panel for St. Louis, Missouri, there were 14 people. And they decided each candidate would come in and interview with the 14 people. Well, that's what I do well. Put me in a group of 14, I can do better than one-on-one. And it went around the table with mayors and so forth, and finally the last person was a woman. And she had just been a White House fellow. And she said to me, okay, you were in the JCs. Were there any people here in the JCs? We have a few. Raise your hand proudly. Excellent. So I said, yes, I was in the JCs. She said, well, I see here that you set up a prison chapter at Rikers Island Prison in New York City. I said, yes, that was a really tough place. And then she said, I see here you ran a shopping tour for 500 kids at Christmas time and you let them run around Macy's in New York City. I said, yes, I did. And then she said, but here's my question. How can you possibly be in an organization that doesn't allow women? And I said, well, I was in the New York City chapter and we had women. She said, what do you mean? I said, look, the president was from Pfizer. I was the vice president, we were from Pfizer. We voted the women in. But what did the national office say? We didn't care. The JCs were doing good and we didn't care. Now, there are a number of engineers in this group. That's Martin Jischke. He used to be the chancellor of University of Nebraska and also a mechanical engineer. That's General Wes Clark, you may know, the NATO commander. He's a West Point engineer. This Marsh Carter, his father was a general, 3-star general in the Army. He went to West Point, got a degree in engineering, and then joined the U.S. Marines. And where I was building roads, he was fighting hand to hand. He was up north in the Vietnam War. And there's a few other here. This is Martin, this is John Oblak. He's an engineer. That's another engineer, Dennis Blair. Dennis Blair, you may recognize, was the commander of the 6th Fleet during 9/11. And this is David Rowe, also another engineer. He's from the Air Force Academy. So we had 7 engineers in our class, and each of us were assigned to a cabinet level officer. And this is one of my failures. I've been a failure many, many times in trying to make a difference, many times. Usually I don't admit them. I like to say, look what I did. This was the Department of Agriculture. I went and I worked for Earl Butz, the most powerful agricultural man in the world. Why did I go there? What I've told everybody up until today is I went there because I was from New York City. I didn't know anything about agriculture and I wanted to learn about agriculture. That's not true. What I wanted to do is to cure world hunger. I said, look, I can do it. I lived in Maryland and I was 5 miles away from this Department of Agriculture. Was basically across the street from the White House, and I drive every day, but I stopped at a church every day. And I said, dear Lord, help me, please, to wipe out world hunger. And I put together a plan to do it, but the White House Fellows Program, it was an education program. We went to many countries in Africa. We went to Boston, because at the time of the busing crisis, met with mayors, met with all the senators, met with the president twice. And then the Secretary of Agriculture said, Tom, you're a chemist, you're a chemical engineer. I said, no, I'm an industrial engineer. He said, but Les, you know a lot about chemistry. I'd like you to set up a committee to be the liaison between the environmental community and the farmers. So that took a lot of my time. So the Agriculture Economic Service assigned me somebody to work on world hunger. Then it became time to leave. A year was up, and guess what? The report wasn't finished. I wanted to focus on the manufacturing of food in the world, not distributing rice. But I failed. I left, and I accomplished nothing to end world hunger. So I said to myself, one day I'm going to come back, and I'm going to meet somebody like Dr. Pack, and we're going to go to Africa. Then I got lucky. After the White House Fellows, I was selected to be an engineer, or before the White House Fellows, I was selected to be an engineer at Pfizer. And these are the Pfizers. One of them is an engineer. This is Mr. Pfizer. That's Mr. Earhart. And remember, they were German immigrants. They couldn't even speak the language. The reason they went to Brooklyn is because Brooklyn was the outer borough at the time. And so they went to Brooklyn. One was a chemist, the other was a confectioner. They said, let's make a product called Santonin, which was for parasitic worms, which comes from a plant called Artemis acina. This is what the Brooklyn plant used to look like. This is back in the early 1960s. You can see all this vacant property. This is after I cleaned it up because there was a lot of debris and garbage around this plant. And this is what it was typically like when I came. They called and said, Tom, you know, this is Pfizer's oldest plant. The oldest building is 125 years. We have 28 buildings, 1 million square feet, but we also have old people. We have 1,000 people. The average age is 50. And we have old products. We still make the penicillin that we made in World War II. And they said, would you like to be plant manager? I said, sure. Of course I'll be plant manager. So I accepted that responsibility, and then I had a phone call from the chairman of the board of Pfizer, who used to be one of McNamara's whiz kids. He was the assistant secretary of defense for finance. And he said, Tommy, he used to call me Tommy, I met him, come see me. And I went to his big office, you know, 23rd floor of New York City office, and he said, Tom, there must be something a big company can do to make a difference in solving the problems that we face in our America's inner cities. And he said, Tom, I want the Brooklyn plant to be the example of that, because we were in the middle of a war zone. And he said, I want you to be in charge. Do you accept? What do you think I said? Sure, Mr. Pratt. Sure, I accept. I knew I had a plant to run. And so one thing I focused on first was housing. Now, I just want to give you just a small example of housing. This is one of the burned out buildings. When I took over the plant, there were 1,000 abandoned buildings in Brooklyn. 1,000. It's a big place. It's 60 square miles. It's 4 million people. It's a big, big town. And what happened was rent control. And then after rent control, the liberalism said, well, if people can't afford the rent, they don't have to pay it. And so the costs kept going up. And the landlords finally said, I can't make any money here. I'll just dump the building and take the tax write-off. What they didn't know is by dumping the building, they were dumping some of the most valuable property in the world. And so through low-income tax credits, we invested $8 million, and we renovated 490 apartments in these buildings. And guess what we did with them? We gave them to the poor for free. Then there was this. This is another example. Right near here, there was a social club. And we had this kind of stuff behind it. And one day, my security manager came. He always wore his gun. And he came and he said, Tom, this is going to make you sick. Did you have lunch yet? I said, I didn't have it. Show me. And it was a picture of a young girl. She had already turned yellow. She was 16 years old. She had been raped and murdered and put in a plastic bag behind the social club. And they said, we can't identify her. We can't identify her, Tom. Do you know anybody that would know her? And I said I couldn't, but I'm going to do something about that. So we took down these buildings, and guess what? We built 25 new homes. This is literally across the street from the Pfizer plant where the garbage was. And so on Christmas Eve, I called Ed Pratt. I said, Mr. Pratt, he said, Tommy, what do you want? I said, look, can you be free to come to dinner in Brooklyn? And he said, sure, my chauffeur can find the way, and that's what he did. Ed Pratt came to dinner on this lot where the young girl's body had been found, and we toasted to the new homeowners who worked in the city of New York. Then there's education. This is the former administration building of Pfizer. My office was right over here. This is a gas tank, because there's a gas station right over here. And as you know, education is a big problem in the United States, really terrible in the cities. And we have some problems here too. One day a couple of entrepreneurs came to me and said, Tom, look, we have an idea for an innovative school, but we have the approval of the chancellor and of the union. It has to be public, and it's going to be a pre-K through 6th grade, and we're going to give them all the support that we can. And they said, we've adopted, and I have a dream class. This is Eugene Lane, a big stockbroker. And they said, but we adopted at 7th grade, we'll train the students, and we'll pay their way through college if they make it. So they said, it's too late in 7th grade. We have to start in pre-K. And I was so excited about it, I pounded my big conference table. I said, yes, let's do it. And she said, but we need a building, not a table. And I said, I'll give you this building. She said, you're going to give us the whole building? This, by the way, is the original Pfizer building for 1840. I said, yes, I'll give you the whole building. I knew my boss wanted me to get out of it. We could save money. So I called them up. And I said, he was a double E. Dr. Pax heard the story. And I said, John, they want to put a school. He said, you want a bunch of kids running around your plant? So I couldn't call Ed Pratt directly, but I was chairman of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. And one of my, by the way, there are 400 members. It's a big place. But one of my colleagues was the chairman of the Brooklyn Union Gas Company, Eugene Lundy. He lived next to Ed Pratt. And I knew every Saturday that they played tennis. And I said, Gene, I can't call him directly. You tell Mr. Pratt that I think we ought to put this school there. And on Monday I get in, there was a message from Mr. Pratt. I'm having a luncheon on Tuesday. I go to the luncheon, there's Mr. Pratt and all the senior executives and the two entrepreneurs who wanted the school. They make their pitch. Now here's leadership. Mr. Pratt turns to the president of Pfizer and he says, Bill, I think that's a great idea. What do you think? And then he went all around the table and I was the last one. He said, Tommy, what do you think? You're the Brooklyn plant manager. I said, oh, Mr. Pratt, it's a great idea. And that's what we did. We opened a public school right at the Brooklyn plant to deal with young children like this. And before we get to crime, I saw an article just the other day that this school was named as one of the top 155 schools in the city of New York. 30 years later. And as we know, the city of Chattanooga has some problems. But fighting violent crime, I'd like to just turn your attention to this photo. You'll notice the school building. That's the school building. This was my office. Oh boy. The former chairman of the board's office. It was really cool for a plant manager. Pfizer had 100 plants. One day I heard gunfire. So I looked out my window right here, and I see a policeman had been coming here, but somebody robbed this gas station at lunchtime. He made the mistake of running out with his gun. And I said, uh-oh, this is a problem. And then the bullets started to fly. And it was then that I decided that, we're going to put crime on our list, and we're going to do something to make a difference here. So I made another mistake. I'm going to admit it. You know how you procrastinate, Max said a little bit, you don't get it done, you don't make the list. One night, instead of taking the van that I had set up out of Brooklyn at 5:15, I waited till 6 o'clock, which meant I had to take the subway. So I ran. I've been on the subway. I ran downstairs. I gave the guy a $5 bill. He gave me change for $1. And I'm arguing when the train comes and goes. And there I am at the end of the platform. And this is what the subway, this is an actual picture. This is the end. I was up the other side. You're saying they actually run people through here every day? And so I go on the other side of the turnstile, and all of a sudden I hear, ooh! And I look around, there's 4 big men with knives. And they had a little guy, chubby guy, on the ground, and I knew the MO, that they used the knives to cut out their packets. And I've told Dr. Pack the story before. That's when right brain, left brain, I don't know which is which, I'm an industrial engineer, but one side said, Tom, you are a Vietnam veteran, you know a little bit about contact and combat, jump over that turnstile and help that poor man. The other side says, Tom, you're not in Vietnam, you're in Brooklyn. You jump over that turnstile, you're going to get killed, boy. You're going to get killed. So it was the easiest decision I made in my life. I ran like hell. I jumped down into the turnstile, climbed over the other side, got up on the other side, climbed over, went right over the third rail with all the electricity through it. Just then a cop comes down, where's the robbery? The other side, where's the victim? In the meantime, a train came in, he got on the train and left. I said, he's on the train. He said, where are the bad guys? They ran out. He said, who the hell are you? I said, I'm Tom Klein, the Brooklyn plant manager, and I'm mad as hell. And I was. And the next day I summoned, there were 3 police forces in New York at the time, the NYPD, the housing police, and the transit police. We sat there. Somebody said we ought to put closed-circuit television cameras. Today, there are 2,000 closed-circuit television cameras in the New York subway system. Then there was one. They said there's only one in Times Square. I said, let's do it. They said there's only one problem. We don't have any money. I said, what do you mean you don't have any money? He said it costs $20,000. This is a low-volume station. The government will never approve it. I said, I'll buy you the cameras. So I called my boss. He said, $20,000? I said, yes, but we're going to save lives. He said, okay. And so that's what we did. We put in the first closed-circuit television camera. When the lieutenants came back again and said, one problem, Mr. Klein, thanks for the cameras, we have no officers to be sitting down looking at the monitors. I said, what? Then it occurred to me, we had a guard's desk 100 yards away. This is, forgive me, I'm dating myself, but this was before Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all this kind of stuff. So I said, we can run a wire 100 yards and our guards will monitor. And that's what we did. And just a couple of weeks later, a young woman went down. Can you imagine going down? We put in off-hours waiting there area, and it was very nice, but she went to the far end of the train, right up around here, And she was standing there, a young man comes down with a knife and robs her. But he made a mistake. He ran in front of our camera, which took a picture of him, and he had a big pink pocketbook. I knew the DA. He was also in the Chamber of Commerce. And he said, look, I have a special prosecutor for transit crime. Tom, if you have this guy on tape, we'll get him convicted. And he got 14 years. And since that time, we have had many good events. Now, I'm not going to tell you the final conclusion. You'll have to see the movie, which is called The Corporation, which I have a cameo appearance in, where I came back to test the camera system, and it didn't work on national television 10 years later. But this you'll recognize. These are the two entrepreneurs. That's the new chairman of Pfizer, Bill Steer, whose father used to be the president of the Botanic Gardens in New York City. And that's the very famous Rudolph Giuliani. And so we've had a lot of good fun. And this is what Brooklyn looks like today. You can see we took down all these buildings. Yes, we demolished the 28 buildings. Now there's some industry and a lot of housing. And I was with the mayor of this good city just a few weeks ago, and he said, Williamsburg. He said, Williamsburg, that property is very valuable. You should have bought some. And he was right, but I couldn't, you know, in engineering integrity, I really couldn't be buying the property that I was having the city clean up so that we could give it to the poor. Then I got promoted. By the way, you talk about how long you spend at a job. I was there 13 years in Brooklyn. As a plant manager, they didn't make you a vice, no, but you do, no, I was there 13, but it was the best job in the city of New York. And suddenly I'm a vice president. I have all these operations around the world, logistics, contract manufacturing, procurement. It was pretty cool. I could go everywhere that I wanted to go. But as I went, that's when I really started to think about malaria. This is the Anopheles gambiae mosquito. And at that time, there were over 1 million people dying every year. Now, last year there were 426,000. Most of them are children, 5 years old and younger, and pregnant women. Those are the real victims. So I began to think about this while I'm on these late night flights traveling around the world. Dr. Pak mentioned walking. Oh yeah, yesterday I met some people from Laos. I said, well, I walked across Laos because I was there. So I was in China and I walked from Laos to Burma, Myanmar, and then took a speedboat down the Mekong River to Chiang Mai and over to Bangkok, and then flew home and said, Tom, my wife said, Tom, boy, you look weary. What happened? I said, oh, honey, there was a lot of technical problems, but we made it. Now, please listen.
And greetings from Nooksut, Alaska, May 4th, 2015. We have arrived.
Here I come. I can feel the exhilarating feeling. Key West is just around the corner. It's been 6,500 miles. The end is finally here.
Okay, so I've reached the southernmost point in the United States. The question is, what comes next? About all I can say is I want to get that way. Find an island, find a continent, find some people, and keep on walking. It's trying to wipe out, as you know, malaria. Let's end this disease. Who can do it?
So that was a few years ago. The way that this walk occurred is that I told my wife that I wanted to go walking 6,500 miles. You know, I'm going to do my 30th New York City Marathon in November. So she knows I do these crazy long distance races. And she said, fine, how long? And I said, I think I can do it in a year. I said, a year? You think you're going to retire and go away for a year? No way. And so I did it in stages. And it took 9 years. It took 9 years to do it. I would go every summer for a few months, and then I'd call in. I had one of these satellite telephones. But my family was very, very supportive because they knew I had a cause. And it was this, that we can wipe out malaria, it occurred to me, using small unmanned aerial vehicles. And that's when I was blessed, literally blessed, to meet Dr. Pak and his distinguished team. Yesterday, one of the drone experts, Dr. Zach Robel, was sitting right over there with me for 2 hours, and he took my nephews. Ruben, will you please stand up and just say hello? Ruben Vega, who happens to be from Tallahassee. And Nathaniel, please stand up. When you ask Nathaniel where he's from, He's going to tell you California, Colorado, and Connecticut, where you currently list. But we had a chance to see the drone that Dr. Pack is really leading the conceptual, but we have a team, we have 4 PhDs and 2 graduate students working on a drone that can be combined with other techniques such as sanitation, better housing, better education, that can be combined to deal with this Anopheles mosquito. And here I am in Tanzania. Doctor, is there any distinguished professor from Tanzania? Will you please stand up? So, thank you very much. So, I had a chance to go to Tanzania and to meet with the Ifakara Health Institute. And the way this came about was very fortuitous, is that I was in Puerto Rico, and there were mosquitoes. My wife's from Puerto Rico. We've been married for 43 years. And I was struck by the mosquitoes, and now that I had been walking and studied the breed a little bit, I started to call around. Nobody answered my phone call. So finally, I called a friend of mine who used to be the head of manufacturing for the world, the SmithKline Beecham Company. He was Puerto Rican. And he said, I'll help you out. A week later, he called from Baltimore, Maryland. And he had the phone. He was at the Johns Hopkins School of Tropical Medicine with a researcher who was Puerto Rican. And the first thing she said, Tom, do you know Fredros Okumo? And I said, I don't know Dr. Okumo, but I've read everything that he's ever written about malaria. He was from Tanzania. And she said, he's a friend of mine. Okay, 2 months later, here I am in Tanzania. If that's not a spiritual occurrence of some kind. And Dr. Pack is leading a team now, along with Dr. Roble and others, and we're hoping to go back in May to actually try our vehicles. And then finally, there's family, but it's always first. And that as we go out and try to make a difference in the world, whether it be technical, serendipity, being a movie producer, or working on humanity, of course we put our families first. And they have to make a sacrifice. It's hard. It's hard. But my nephews and I have been talking about family. You see, when I came here to Chattanooga, I was the oldest son, and I knew that I had the responsibility for my other siblings and my mom and my dad. That was my responsibility. My mom had taught me that. There was no variability on that. And I knew, too, that someday my responsibility to my family, I might have to define the family different. That people in Tanzania that I've never met. But by coming here to Chattanooga in engineering, I learned how to do it. I learned it here. Again, my spirituality, my personality, all this was formed. But here I learned how to combine engineering and make a difference in the world, or at least to try in little teeny steps. And finally, often in the world, you come across some wonderful people who you meet them for a few months and they make a fundamental difference in their life. And I'm sorry that this person couldn't be here today, but maybe some of you know Susan, who used to be the head of, the executive assistant of Dr. Pack, but she was really one of the engineers. And every single time that I called, I'd get an email and a call, and she always called me Mr. Klein. By the way, my wife used to call me Mr. Klein, because one day I told Dr. Pack the story. My boss, the double E, called me. I was in Puerto Rico with 100 questions. This was before computers. I'm really dating myself. But we had telex, and I answered the 100 questions, and my wife had newly come from Chicago. She was bilingual, and she typed the questions. And she said, yes, Mr. Klein, I'll do it. That was the last time she called me Mr. Klein. But we have been married for 43 years. So I would like to dedicate this little presentation to Susan Cardwell. She's just a wonderful person. She couldn't be here, but maybe we have a little round of applause for Susan. And finally, I couldn't in good faith, if it says Lunatic Fringe Express, I really couldn't call this serendipity. But I am a frustrated comedian. And I used to do the comedy circuit in New York City. And the way that works, there's a lot of comedy clubs. You go on Monday night at 7 o'clock. Now, there's nobody in the audience at 7 o'clock. And you get up and do your shtick. So I would write my shtick and get up and do it. Of course, nobody ever hired me. So finally, I was transferred to California. And I said to my wife, I'm going to go on the Gone Show. And she said, you will never do it. Well, if anybody ever says to me, you'll never do it. So I've also been a frustrated singer. You know, I always wanted to be a singer, but all I know is kind of like rock and roll from the 50s. That's all I know. So the name of my song was Splish Splash, I Was Taking a Bath, literally on the Gone Show in a bathtub. And all I can say to end is, I wasn't gone. Thank you for listening. And now I'm going to take a bite of my favorite snack, because I was blessed. The last time I was in Chattanooga, I took a plane. And the plane went from, I was going to Puerto Rico to see my wife, had to land in Atlanta. And I was going on to Puerto Rico. And as I'm in Atlanta, I had my moon pies in a bag. Miriam, please stand up. Miriam said, look, I said my wife wants both of them. This is Miriam, and that's Marianne. So Miriam said, she took me to the airport. She said, we have time to go to the supermarket. I said, oh, I don't think we do. She said, look, you've got to bring your wife the moon pies. So we did, and we put them in a bag. I didn't want them crushed. So I'm in the Atlanta airport going up the escalator where Marion Campbell was standing next, stand up please, next to John Campbell. And Marion said, that's a really good product. And I said, you know, I wish I knew somebody who was a really senior person in the company. And she said, he's standing next to you. And it was John Campbell. So we got on the same plane to Puerto Rico, and their hotel was on the same street that I used to live in Puerto Rico. So I'm going to snack on my moon pies, but we have a few minutes for questions. So how many people here think that one Chattanooga engineer can make a difference? If you do, can you please stand up and be recognized? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the engineers who make such a difference in this community. This whole E-Week is about how do we leverage our activities as individuals, the one engineer who's going to make a difference, but uniting as a team, motivating leaders of organizations, even a guard sitting and watching a monitor. You can forge partnerships that make such a huge impact. That's what Chattanooga has certainly done. And when I look at the history here in terms of the environmental issues that this community faced and decided that's enough, and this community accomplished the impossible. When you look at where we are now with the Ironman swimming in a river that used to burn, where are we going in the future? It's up to all of us. Our students are the future. The funding for the scholarships, thank you, that will be put to great use by UTC and our partner, Chat State. But as we look at giving back to this community, inspiring young people, our Challenger Center here, a partnership with Hamilton County Schools, when I look at what our county mayor, Jim Coppinger, city mayor, Andy Burke, the Business Development Center, the Innovation District, together when you look at what we can accomplish here, it's incredible. And so I applaud all of you for what you're doing, and hope that you will continue to work together to reach out, to have all of us who are not engineers. I'm one of the chemists who rely on engineers to make it all a reality. But it takes those partnerships, I think, to forge the future that this community needs. So thank you for being here. Thanks to all who helped put this on. For EPB, I know David Wade couldn't be here, but and to Dean Pack, thank you. You've got a great team of people and are an incredible leader. And UTC is people. It's a wonderful place, but we are nothing without people. And so as each of you leave here, I think Tom Klein's message is that we can make a difference, we do make a difference, and don't underestimate your impact on this world. And so, thank you.